I understand that the talking points for some are that we're in a period of income stagnation. The data do not show that. Let's look at Census Bureau data. Census Bureau, which is, I think, a reputable government agency, if there's one, it's the Census Bureau. They track a median household income. And so a lot of these stats that we see suggesting we're in a period of stagnation, they don't always adjust household income for family size, which has changed over the decades. Look at the Census Bureau data. You see that adjusted for inflation, the middle class has indeed declined as far as the percentage of the population. It's gone from 37% to 32% of the population. The lower middle class and lower class has declined as well as a percentage. So what's happened to all these people? Tens of millions of people. It's in the data. There's a much greater percentage of people now that are earning in the upper middle income, adjusted for inflation, and upper income. It's gone from, I've got the number here, 13% to 30% of the population. And we've seen that over 40 years. And one other really interesting stat that plays this out is disposable income. If you look at us versus Germany, for instance, we're earning $11,000 more per family in disposable income, and that has widened over the past 20 years. Things are looking up for Americans on all income levels, and this is something we should be applauding.
That really isn't right. It just isn't right, because I mean, you can look at household income, you can also look at real wages, which is kind of important. One of the reasons household income has been able to keep up is that more people are going to work, people are working longer hours, they're retiring later. That's some stress on a family. But if you look at, for example, the real wage, the hourly wage of the median, the guy right in the middle, the median male worker, he earns less today in 2018 than he did in 1973. That's pretty extraordinary. There's been a lot of economic growth and technology and so on, and yet workers and the middle class have not seen their share of that. Virtually all of the income gains in the last 10 or 20 years have gone to the top 10%, most of those to the top 1% or the top 0.1%. We've seen CEO pay of the biggest companies skyrocket almost 1,000%, while wages of ordinary workers are pretty stagnant at around 12% real growth.
Well, President Trump himself actually talked about the economy earlier this week, and he specifically focused on wage growth. Here's what President Trump had to say.
You know, a number just came out. I don't know if you saw. Moody's, respected. And it said that under the Bush administration for 8 years, median household income went up $400. That's over 8 years, okay? So remember, $400, 8 years. Under President Obama, median household income went up $975 over 8 years. Over your favorite president, President Donald J. Trump, median household income for 2.5 years. So remember this, 8 years, 400 bucks, 400 bucks. You don't even, that gets wiped out by inflation. $400, $975. In 2.5 years, our number is $5,000 plus $2,000 for the tax cuts, $7,000.
Joel, how has President Trump done with the U.S. economy?
Well, I think if you look at the economic numbers, they have improved over the past few years. Now, of course, this is a continuation of growth that began during President Obama's administration. But we saw an acceleration in the GDP rate following the economic growth rate following the tax cuts. And I think importantly to the typical family, the average family, you've seen about $2,800 per year in tax savings if you're a dual income family with say 2 children. These are real benefits for typical Americans. If you look at the wage growth itself, the numbers show it. Official government data showing that median household income continues to grow. In real terms, has grown by more than $4,000 in the past few years. And if you look in the past year, just at the wage growth itself, those at the bottom of the income scale have seen their wage growth grow at around twice the rate of those at the top, at roughly 6% for those at the bottom, which is well in excess of inflation, and around 3.5% for those at the upper reaches. Once again, this is positive news for not just the wealthy, not just the poor, everybody across the spectrum.
Thea, same question. How has President Trump done with the U.S. economy?
Well, I'd say the tax bill was an enormous boondoggle that has failed to deliver on growth, on productivity, on investment, on all the promises that were made on its behalf, and the vast majority of the benefits of that tax bill went to corporations and the wealthy. So, and that's blown $1 trillion hole in our deficit. That's going to be something which is going to be an excuse for people to talk about cutting vital social programs. So I would say that certainly on the tax front, President Trump, as you said, Joel, inherited a growing economy. He's juiced it up with a sugar high because he cut taxes and increased spending last year. So he was able to get a temporary boost, but he also at the cost of $1 trillion increase in the deficit during a time when the economy was growing. This is when we ought to be preparing for the future for an inevitable downturn or slowdown that's going to be coming. And yet we've built in all these problems. On the other hand, also the Trump administration has taken a lot of actions that are anti-worker, where he has cut overtime pay, he has cut protections for workers, union protections, safety and health protections. These are all poison pills that are going to live with working people for decades to come if we don't figure out a way to reverse it.
Joe, how important is the federal debt and the federal deficit right now? That's one thing Theo brought up was the federal debt. How important of an issue is that right now?
It's highly important, but I can just go really quickly to something you mentioned before. Number one, when it comes to the tax cuts, so yes, a large portion of those tax cuts went to lowering the corporate income tax rate. Well, that's because our corporate income tax rate was at the highest in the industrialized world. This was deterring business investment. I understand the argument that if you lower the corporate tax rate, that those at the top, they are going to receive more of those benefits. But that's an incomplete way of looking at the picture. Because it's those corporations and those investors, when they earn that income, it's not as if they're just spending that on consumption items of buying a new yacht. Most of those resources go into actually growing the businesses and investing in technology and research and development that increases productivity, that helps all of us because labor shares in that, and increases breakthrough technologies, whether it's medicine or otherwise. And we've seen that. We've seen productivity increase. We have seen productivity increase the last few years. That is translating into wages increasing across the board. And when it comes to manufacturing, in 2018, we hit 2 consecutive quarterly all-time outputs in real manufacturing, the first record high since 2007. So yes, deficit spending is highly important. It's not the fault of the tax cuts. We're now seeing an increase in revenue. Look at last year, we saw a 4% increase in tax revenue, roughly. We saw increase in spending almost double that. That's the major reason of why we're seeing this deficit blow a hole in our budget.
Go ahead.
In fact, we did not see the growth in investment that we had been promised by the corporate tax cut. What we saw was that most of the corporate tax cut went into stock buybacks. That's self-enrichment, where these people are making decisions that enrich themselves and the value of the stock that they own. And so what we need to look for is what is going to happen going forward, given the kinds of structural change that were made in the tax bill, and do we have the resources that we need to fund the things that we need, whether it's infrastructure or education or investments in our children and in our future. And I would say that tax bill has taken away the resources that we need as a country going forward to invest in our future.
This is a great conversation, but let's let our callers get involved as well.